Welcome to this explainer. Have you ever looked at a grocery bill, maybe a fuel pump receipt, or just checked your bank balance and thought, wait, who's actually deciding these prices? Because let's be real, every single day, your life is being shaped by massive economic forces you can't even see. Well, today, we're going to decode those invisible forces that directly control the money in your pocket. Okay, let's dive into this by asking a pretty simple but painful question. When your home loan gets more expensive seemingly out of nowhere, or when your daily groceries suddenly cost more, who is pulling those strings? It's definitely not random. It's actually the result of massive decisions made by two incredibly powerful entities, your central government and your central bank. And we are going to unlock exactly how that entire system works. Here's our agenda for today. 1. Micro versus macroeconomics. 2. Fiscal policy, the government's wallet. 3. Monetary policy, the thermostat. 4. India's mixed economy model. And 5. The RBI and inflation targeting.
Starting with Section 1, Micro versus Macroeconomics.
It really helps to think of microeconomics as a microscope. It focuses on individual choices, how your specific household manages its budget, or the local supply and demand for just a single product. But macroeconomics, that is the satellite view. It zooms way out, completely ignores the individual shop, and looks at the entire country as one giant machine. Micro is your personal choice, while macro is the vast, overarching environment that those choices are made in. Looking through this macro lens, instead of tracking a single shop's daily sales, we track gross domestic product, or GDP. This is basically the ultimate measure of the nation's engine. It tells us the total monetary value of all final goods and services produced within the entire country. It's essentially the grand scorecard for how well the whole machine is running at any given time. We also use that macro lens to track another massive force, and that's inflation. This is exactly why the price of your daily necessities just seems to creep up year after year. Inflation measures the sustained percentage change in the general price level of goods and services across the entire economy. So it begs the question, who actually controls this huge macro environment? That brings us to Section 2, Fiscal Policy, the government's wallet. First step in the driver's seat is the central government. Think of the government as a giant household manager. They have this massive wallet, and they use something called fiscal policy to decide two main things. First, how to collect revenue, which is through direct and indirect taxation. And second, what massive public chores or projects to actually spend that money on. So the crucial point here is how they use these levers. When the economy is slowing down and jobs are scarce, the government hits the accelerator. This is expansionary fiscal policy. They cut taxes, offer investment incentives to businesses, and pump money into the system through huge infrastructure projects, basically putting cash directly into your wallet. But if the economy starts overheating and prices rise way too fast, they slam on the brakes with contractionary fiscal policy. They'll raise taxes and cut public spending to cool down all that consumer demand. Let's move to Section 3, Monetary Policy, the thermostat. So while the government is busy managing budgets and infrastructure, a completely separate entity is managing the actual physical currency floating around, and that entity is the central bank. If the government is the wallet, the central bank is the financial engineer. Through monetary policy, they control the literal flow and availability of cash in the system. They do this primarily by managing the money supply and adjusting interest rates to keep prices stable and employment steady. Just like the government has an accelerator and a brake, the central bank has a thermostat. When they need to boost a sluggish economy, they turn the thermostat to a dovish, or easy money policy. They lower interest rates, making loans cheap, so businesses and people like you and me go out and spend more. But to fight dangerous inflation, they crank it up to a hawkish, or tight money policy. They raise interest rates, making your loans intentionally expensive to cool down all that spending and stop prices from skyrocketing.
Section 4, India's mixed economy model.
So let's bring this closer to home. India operates a mixed economy. This means the public sector provides the strategic stewardship and the heavy infrastructure, while the private sector is really relied upon to drive core economic growth. Our economy is structured across three main sectors. The primary sector employs a massive portion of our workforce in agriculture. The secondary sector handles manufacturing and construction, and the tertiary sector, which is services like IT and finance, well, that's currently the single largest contributor to our GDP.
Within this mixed structure, how exactly does the government use its wallet? Well, on the fiscal side, the Ministry of Finance is in charge. Every single year, they present the union budget. This is the ultimate blueprint where the government lays out its exact spending and taxation plans for the entire year.
And locally, we really see this expansionary fiscal policy in action through aggressive capital expenditure, or CapEx. The government is intentionally spending massive amounts of money on mega projects, like the PM Gati Shakti Master Plan, building out highways and modernizing logistics. This naturally crowds in private investment and creates jobs. Simultaneously, they use very targeted welfare, things like food security and fertilizer subsidies, to insulate vulnerable rural populations from unpredictable global economic shocks.
Finally, Section 5, the RBI and inflation targeting. The RBI is our central bank, and its big decisions are made by the Monetary Policy Committee. The RBI acts as India's thermostat. They use specific tools like the cash reserve ratio, or CRR, and the statutory liquidity ratio, the SLR. Now, these are basically percentages of cash that commercial banks are forced to lock away in a vault. By adjusting these ratios, the RBI tightly controls exactly how much liquidity is floating around in the local banking system. And their ultimate legal mandate? To target consumer price inflation. Okay, let's really focus on this specific number, because it dictates so much of our day-to-day economy. The RBI operates under a strict, flexible inflation targeting framework. They are legally mandated to keep consumer price inflation at exactly 4% while operating within a fairly tight tolerance band of 2 to 6%.
To hit that magic 4% target, the RBI's absolute ultimate weapon is the repo rate. This is the baseline interest rate at which the RBI lends money to commercial banks, like SBI or HDFC. Remember earlier when we talked about hawkish and dovish policies? Well, if the RBI raises this repo rate to fight inflation, those commercial banks are absolutely going to pass that increased cost directly on to you.
So, the crucial point here is this number, 5.25%. This is the current baseline repo rate. The RBI has maintained this rate to very carefully balance our local economic growth with the constant looming risks of global inflation. They hold this rate steady to protect the value of the Indian rupee and keep your retail loans relatively predictable, even when global supply chains are facing massive shocks.
And you know, it all builds into this perfect interconnected cycle. It starts right at the top. The RBI adjusts the baseline repo rate. Instantly, commercial banks change their lending rates. Because of that, your specific home loan EMIs and credit card interest rates shift. If your loans become expensive, you pause spending. As spending slows down across the entire nation, businesses have to stop raising prices, and inflation drops right back toward that 4% target. This step-by-step chain reaction proves that macroeconomic policies aren't just some boring academic theory. They directly alter your monthly budget. So, armed with this brand new understanding of fiscal wallets and monetary thermostats, are you ready to decode the economic forces shaping your daily life? Because the next time you open a news app and hear terms like repo rate changes or union budget deficits, you really don't have to tune it out anymore. You know that the government influences the system through your taxes, and the central bank controls the system through your interest rates. Knowledge really is power, and you now have the tools to see that invisible hand at work. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.